Welcome. Good afternoon, ELAC family, distinguished guests, community members, faculty, staff, administrative team. What an honor it is for us to host this wonderful panel event today. I wanted to first and foremost welcome you. This is our last virtual racial equity and social justice town hall for the spring and the academic year. As a campus, we've been and continue to pave new pathways of transformative justice and healing. And really, these town halls have helped us to engage in collectively talking about issues related to equity, inclusion, building cultural competencies, and really creating pathways of access for our entire Husky community. This is a critical space, and albeit virtual, it has afforded us the opportunity to learn how to listen deeply to those of us who have experienced oppression, violence, trauma, and also for us who have the wisdom and the resilience to survive and thrive despite many of the challenges that we have faced. Through these town halls, we brought a community of thinkers, journalists, activists, artists to remind us that our collective center and our shared humanity and experiences are really important. Having these conversations will prompt us to remember to see humanity before man-made constructs of race, borders, and gender, and instead to really value and prioritize empathy, wisdom, and caring for each other. And this is really what East LA College and the LACCD district is all about. This is a special time for us as we celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, and I have the great fortune to welcome members of our community, our very own community, with diverse professional and cultural backgrounds. They have all centered their work around equity and racial justice as a way to address disparities. These amazing panelists that you'll hear from today will share their personal experiences with the underrepresentation and highlight their wonderful cultures and professional trajectories. And of course, we couldn't do this without the support and leadership of a team we have at the district office. And I want to officially introduce the leader of our district, a gentleman who has been working almost for 10 years at this district, doing incredible work around racial justice or social justice and racial equity. And we're pleased and honored to have him with us today. And I want to acknowledge his presence. Our very own Chancellor, Francisco Rodriguez, welcome. And thank you for being here with us today, Chancellor Rodriguez. Thank you so much. Of course, another person that I've worked with for many years as well, and somebody, again, that I admire and look really to learn from in terms of how we do equity work in community colleges, somebody that has really supported ELAC and the entire 9 colleges with an equity lens approach to ensure that our students get the support they need, our faculty, our staff. And I'm just honored she was able to make it and join us as well. And she's with us today, Trustee Andra Hoffman, welcome so much, and welcome, and thank you very much for being with us as well. Trustee Hoffman, thank you so much. And, I'm going to ask our distinguished director of the VPAM to actually introduce our panelists. We're excited you're here. You're in for a treat, folks, and looking forward to a wonderful conversation with our 3 distinguished panelists. So with that, let me turn it over now to Stephen Wong. Stephen Wong is our director of VPAM. Welcome, and Mr. Wong, you have the floor. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here today.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for attending today's town hall series at ELAC on racial equity and social justice. We have lots of people here, lots of guests, lots of people from the district. And I do want to thank the team who put this together, including Nancy. And thank you for having me here to moderate this very special and exciting panel. So it's my pleasure to do this. Again, my name is Stephen Wong. Thank you for the introduction, President Ramon. I'm the director of the Vincent Price Art Museum. And I came here at this point too, through various ways, and just a little background. And President Rahman loves to tell the story, but I first got engaged in arts and civil disobedience as a young teenager as a graffiti artist. And so a lot of people think, oh, civil disobedience and graffiti art, that's something different. But that path brought me here today. I'm really looking forward to hearing our panelists' paths and their struggles and their challenges and their successes as we move on to this panel. And I joined after many years of in education, teaching at community colleges in the arts, also doing nonprofit work, social service work. I'm here today, and I'm excited to join this group and also to moderate this panel. But that being said, let me first introduce all of our panelists. Let's start off with Miss Suzie Suh, and she was born in South Korea, but grew up in Orange County. Within Asian American Studies, we sometimes call that the knee-high generation or the 1.5 generation. Knee-high as in knee-high in height. But it's a very specific experience that immigrants who come over at a very young age, which is different than those who immigrate as full adults. She grew up in Orange County and attended the University of San Diego. Suzie's news career began as a reporter and anchor, amongst many other roles, at KCFW in Montana. She came back to Southern California after being in Montana in 2005 as a general assignment reporter, and she worked hard and rose in the ranks to become the co-anchor for CBS 2 and KCAL 9's weekend newscasts. 10 years ago, in 2013, Ms. Suh was the first Korean-American anchor on an English language primetime newscast in Los Angeles. That's a big deal. Los Angeles is the second largest media market. And so she has a very familiar face and personality all throughout Southern California. And we're honored to have her here today. She and a few personal notes, if I'm understanding her bio correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Suh, is she enjoys hip hop dance, teaching hip hop dance, hip hop acrobatics, and hula dancing. So we saw some dances earlier in the video, and thank you for the team put that video together. Is phenomenal. Also joining us today is Vice President Pascual. Vice President Pascual immigrated from the Philippines, not necessarily as a knee-high or 1.5 generation, and hails from the wonderful city of Fullerton today. Vice President Pascual's educational path started at Briarcliff University in Sioux City, Iowa, where he got his bachelor's, went on to get a master's degree in public administration from USC, just right down the street, and ultimately a JD from Western State University College of Law in Irvine. He spent 17 years at the city of LA, which I actually worked for the city of LA for some time, both in the city attorney's office and the Department of Transportation. He later shifted careers or the career path, got into higher education by becoming the Director of Purchasing and Risk Management at El Camino Community College, and joined the LACCD team and ELAC, or joined the LACCD team at the city of for Los Angeles City College as the Associate VP of Administrative Services, and recently, this past September of last year, joined the ELAC team as Vice President of Administrative Services. A quick note too, and I do know this too from a presentation that I did. He is an amateur musician. I've seen photographs of his family practicing in his room. He loves all food. He says he hasn't eaten anything that he didn't like. I dare you to come on to a food adventure with me, and we should find something that you don't like, VP Pascual. And one of VP Pascual's favorite authors is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Of course, all of you know, was the author of 100 Years of Solitude. And last but not least, on today's panel, we have Trustee Iino. Trustee Iino, also came through the community college system herself. She was a student at El Camino College, later on transferred and got a BA in sociology with a minor education at UCLA, my alma mater too, and a master's in education and counseling in student affairs at UCLA, and a doctorate in educational leadership from USC, a split personal household. Trustee Iino has served as a board member for the Little Tokyo Service Center and the El Camino College Foundation. And with her appointment in April 2022, as a trustee at the Los Angeles Community College District, she was also elected later on in 2022 in November, and she is now our trustee. And please, I hope you don't mind. I've known Trustee Iino for a little bit, but when I first met Trustee Iino, she was a student at UCLA, and she was working at a Thai restaurant, to make ends meet. And the reason I mention this is not to get you mad at me, Trustee Iino, but we all start off with certain careers, and I'm curious as we have this discussion, is like, how did you end up where you are today? So welcome. Everyone, welcome Trustee Iino, welcome Ms. Suh, and then welcome VP Pascual as we kick this off. And I will start with the first question if everyone's ready. And so what I would like to know is from all of you, whoever wants to start first, is did you know at an early point in your life what you wanted to do for your career and your career path? And if so, what was the spark, or what ignited that interest in your career? Or if not, what were some of the factors that brought you to where you are today in your careers? So who wants to start? Okay, Trustee Iino.
I will start since you soft pitched the how did I end up working at a Thai restaurant. So for me, I had no idea what I wanted to do. That's pretty much the reason why I attended community college. I know I should attend college, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went to El Camino. I transferred to UCLA, and at UCLA, I did high school outreach, helping students prepare for college. And I thought that was wonderful. But for me, I kind of slept through high school. And so to really help high school students, particularly be competitive for universities and their dreams, I wasn't quite sure if that was a good fit for me. And so I decided to come back to the community college. I found out I needed a master's degree to do so. So I looked for the quickest and most efficient master's degree program. It also ended up being at UCLA. I burned through that. And then I've been a community college counselor now for 16 years. I love my job. I essentially get to help people apply their passions in life to careers. And it's wonderful. And, as Director Wong said, I think, throughout high school and college, I was always working, either part-time or full-time to make ends meet. And so I went from hostess to waitress to bartender. And I would tell you 9 times out of 10, most of my great, wonderful counseling skills did come from those years as a bartender. And so, I think I learned a lot of formal, text, analytical, critical things, but then I think hands-on and practitioner things a lot came from the bartending thing. And I think for me to now be a trustee, again, totally not planned. The reason why I did that was, I guess I'll rewind a little bit. I was adjunct counseling in 2007 through 2009. So a lot of, that was when the recession hit. I was looking for full-time positions, freeway flying from El Camino to Citrus College to Santa Monica College, bartending on the West Side. I do admissions work for UCLA every year. So I was juggling, right? Trying to make ends meet, always trying to be a lifelong learner. And so I decided to go back to school and get my doctorate during that time. I consulted a lot of my mentors, a lot of people that I trusted, because I was concerned, would I still be able to be a faculty member, knowing that I was preparing for this doctoral program as well. And everyone said, go for it. I had free time, I didn't want to regret sitting idly. And so the doctoral program, I really enjoyed doing it. And I often reference it as street cred. We're in higher education. I look like this, I sound like this. As being an Asian American female who's in her 40s, but looks probably in, 30s, maybe even sometimes 20s, depending on how my tone and how I present myself, right? But at least having some of these credentials under my belt showed and proved to the outside world that I had done these really challenging things and I am very capable. And so, I did that. And I think it also definitely helped me prepare for this trustee role in life. I had been trying to sit on your board now for over 6 years. And the reason why I wanted to do so was essentially because of Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump. During those times, I think a lot of the things that I valued were really being compromised. And so for myself, being what I would consider myself as an activist and social justice advocate, I really wanted to be in a space and roll up my sleeves to do something to protect what I could. And for me, I know public education, I know higher education, and I know community college. And, as a practitioner within the community college system, I thought my input, my perspective, my close relationship with students, because I see them on a daily as a counselor, I would be hopefully a critical component to what I can bring to the board level. I'm sure it'll come up later. I had no idea the magnitude of LACCD or the power and the strength and all the things that I've learned in the last year, but essentially it's all by happenstance. I think just kind of I guess kind of being brave, but it doesn't feel brave. Ignorance is bliss, just wanting to be in these places to fight the good fight with all of you folks. It's kind of what led me to this point, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'll leave it at that.
Right. And thank you for illustrating some of those challenges that you faced as a woman, as an Asian American woman, and as an Asian American who's been blessed with looks of a younger person. So there's oftentimes those challenges of age discrimination or not taking you seriously. So thank you for actually covering some of those challenges that you've had. And I want to ask this to everyone else too. With the main question still is like, what was your path and how did you choose your career? But to follow up on you said like people encourage you to get your doctorate. Who was that? Was it the community? Was your family? And how did the family or your community kind of support you in some of these decisions to get you where you are today?
It's another very interesting thing because, again, it was my peers who were also looking at programs. And so I just happened to go with her. And then at the end of the day, I was like, sold, I need to go to a doctoral program and get my doctorate. And I would actually tell you, having parents who were also educated with graduate degree educations, they actually didn't necessarily make the touch points of why I needed this next degree. I started it when I was in my 30s, and I guess socially, other things should be happening in your life, right? Marriage, children, those kinds of things, and potentially me going for another degree would hinder some of those life choices. But at the same time too, those life choices weren't mine. And so I knew that I needed to stay true to who I was, and I didn't want to regret my time of not doing something. And so I started it. And then I actually also got hired full time. So I went through tenure, the 4 years of probation to become a tenured faculty while I was doing my doctoral program. And it was probably the best decision that I had made. I was able to be around folks who were really passionate about education, K-12, higher ed. And I think it was really inspiring just to have that network of folks to move through. And I'm still friends with a lot of them today.
Oh, thank you for that. And I can't even fathom trying to get tenure while in a PhD program. So kudos to you.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Yes, yes. Let's go back to the same question of, Ms. Suh, did you always know that you wanted to be in front of the camera? And tell us about your trajectory and your spark when it came to your career and your path.
Same for me. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to be a kindergarten teacher for the longest time. And I wanted to go to college and, do that and go into education. But one of my suite mates during my second year, so I'd gone into UC San Diego and declared, and one of my suite mates came into the room and she said, you know what, I'm going to major in communication. I'm going to declare my major in communications because, I said, why? She said, because it's such a broad major. You can go into public relations, you can go into basically anything you want to do. And I thought, you know what, I like to communicate. And that's how I literally went to the communications department and looked at all the internships that you could possibly do under that major. And there was KABC, ABC 7 Eyewitness News intern. And I thought, oh my gosh, that kind of sounds just cool, right? Nothing about journalism. I didn't grow up, into current events, reading the paper every day. I wasn't in a school newspaper in high school. I didn't go to journalism school like USC, like it's a great journalism school. I always say USC because people always talk about, oh, you got to go to journalism school and USC. And I always heard that, growing up, but I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. And, you don't know anything about anything until you actually know, right? Until you actually go into something. So anyways, I chose that internship. Went into the newsroom the summer of my sophomore year, and I just loved what it was about. It was the fast pace, it was the deadlines, it was the, get the story on air. It was, wow, you have so much responsibility in such a short period of time because we have deadlines, right? So, as a reporter, you go grab a story and it's maybe 1 hour sometimes for the entire process, the interviewing part, the getting to the news van, pick what you want from the interview part so that your editor can edit that. They're going to set up your live shot while I'm getting ready to, whatever I'm going to present on television, things like that. I just love that environment. And that's why I got into this. And, I think, the traveling for my job, I think was so influential. Just to speak to, who I am today. As we mentioned earlier, I grew up in Orange County with a heavy Asian population, and even more specifically, Korean population. And so I grew up, that was what was familiar to me. I grew up in that, and to go to another state, Kalispell, Montana, of all places, okay? This Northwest Montana, about 90 miles south of Canada. And, I went there and I had no idea what I was doing. I went with the excitement of, I'm gonna be on TV. I'm not kidding you. At that point in my career, that was what it was about to me. It was that. And I'll get into the details later for the other questions, but my career path took me from Montana to Las Vegas. And then I worked 2 years in Las Vegas and came to Los Angeles. So that's been my career path, but we'll go into the details of other things later. I don't want to take too much time for the other panelists.
But I do want to do the follow-up too, is where did you see, and for non-traditional careers, oftentimes immigrant communities, who their families brought them, all the way from their homeland, and they want to go into more traditional careers, that could be, a typical stereotype of like Asian families or tiger parents. But did you have the support of your family and or community when you chose that career?
That's a really interesting question. I actually, before I became a news reporter, I worked as a paralegal at an immigration law firm. And my mom, I remember the phone call when I told her, I was like, oh, I got this job at this immigration firm. And she said, oh, my daughter's going to become a lawyer, and it was that, it's happening. The dream, American dream is coming true. Little did you know, Suzie didn't want to become a lawyer. It was just not my cup of tea. And when I was leaving for my first job in Montana, it wasn't my mom who was like gung-ho about it. It was my dad, and only because he was going to go on this adventure with me. He was going to drive me to Montana from California, and he was going to drop me off and see all these places along the way, Utah, whatnot, Idaho. And my mom she asked me, the last question she asked me before I left was, what are you doing? Like, are you okay with this? Because I am not. I don't know, I knew the minimum, of how this career works and where it's going to take me next. What city am I going to be in next? I had no idea. But my mom, she was just like, I know nothing about this. All I know is that my 22-year-old daughter, who grew up in this Korean community, is going to Montana, where it's all Caucasian people. Only the people at the Thai sushi restaurant, the nail salon are Asian, and myself on television, right? I'm not kidding. In that town, there was like 4 of us, I think. And at that time, and my mom, she was just worried about me because she was sending her baby to this foreign place in her mind, and I think that was one of the biggest memories I have of my mom, and she wanted to be so supportive of me. She wanted to let me do what I wanted to do, but, it was like, how can I send you? But she was forced to, so.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And these are all experiences that many of us could identify with, and some of those challenges that comes with, having parents who have different expectations, which isn't unique to Asian American Pacific Islanders, but I think it's it's something that to discuss in this space. But let's bring Vice President Pascual into this conversation about how did you end up, because you've dabbled in several different fields, finance, for a Fortune 500 company, a city employee for the city of LA. Tell us how you arrived to where you are and what was the spark for that, for your career.
Sure. I think it's a trifecta. All three of us have something in common. We didn't know what we wanted to be when we were growing up. I certainly didn't know what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a musician. That was kind of my goal, but how I become one was something that I didn't really think about. When I told my parents, oh, maybe I'm going to be a rock star. I mean, that was the teenager version of me. And they said to me, well, that's the first, that's the sure way to become, in their words, the equivalent of being homeless, was because of the instability. I had an uncle, the cousin of my dad. He was a musician in the Philippines. And my dad always kind of not liked the lifestyle because he was traveling a lot. He was away from his family, so that's kind of what was not attractive to my parents. They said, get a good job, live the American dream, get a stable job, be in middle class, pay your taxes, own a home, have a family, have 2 cars, live in the suburbs. So that was my sort of my influence. Now, I had another uncle who was, he was really the sponsor of our family when we came over and migrated from the Philippines. We lived in his house, and they were the first member of our family who migrated to the US. And this uncle and his wife, my aunt, was my godmother. So our family looked up to them, even though my parents were actually older than this couple. But both of the couple worked for the city of LA. And my mom said, Michael, you're going to work for the city of LA. Of course, now I took a lot of exams to get civil service exams, because you just can't apply to the city of LA. You have to take exams, and you have to pass the exam, and you have to be in a certain score and a certain rank, just like in personnel commission for the LACCD. It's only then that you're going to be able to be reachable. So that's what I did. I took exams. My background in finance and accounting. I did work for 2 Fortune 500 companies. The job was interesting, but because of the instability, this was in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. There were a lot of mergers and acquisitions, a lot of consolidations. There were layoffs, and I said, well, this is interesting work, but I really wanted to. At that time, I wasn't even married yet, didn't have a family, but I wanted to have that stability in my life. So I said, so finally, when I got offered a job at the city attorney's office, and we were working personnel, I was working primarily in HR. So that was my first foray in public sector management. So when I got my Master's of Public Administration from USC, that was kind of what I was really leaning to, was staying in public service and staying in government, so that would be my career journey, so my professional career journey. I got into law school only because we were married. I was married at that time, but we didn't have kids yet. I was getting bored, and I was thinking about what would be the next chapter in my career journey. And so I went to law school part-time. By the way, just like all of the panelists here in this presentation, I work all different type of odd jobs. When I was in college, believe it or not, I was working on campus as a typist. Now, this was in the 80s. No, there were no computers. There were no laptops. These were typewriters, IBM machines, where you're typing and it's actually printing on the paper. So I became really fast. I could type like maybe 65 to 70 words per minute. And I was proud of that. That was my job. And then at night, I would work for a bank. We would be entering all of the different checks. You know, at that time, people were still issuing a lot of checks. And you know, on the bottom of those checks, there's a code number in there. We would 10 key it. I mean, it's data entry jobs. And we were required to complete, I don't know how many number per 5 minutes per hour. I can't remember what that number is now. But I was so efficient at it, I would not even look. It's like 10 keying. It's like I could do 20 of them in a minute. That was how proficient I was. And I think that's where I really learned the value of hard work. I mean, to me, it's not the work, it's not the job. Sure, some people could think, well, such a menial job, it's not, you don't do anything substantive. To me, those are lessons learned. Those are the things that build your character, because those are the things that when you move up in your career journey, you understand, well, okay, I used to do that. I used to be this, I used to be that. I also worked in customer service. Now, when I moved from the Philippines, I had a heavy accent. I was very embarrassed. It was really awkward for me to speak to people. But you know what? I said, okay, well, this is not my comfort level. I have to get out of it. So I worked on my accent. I worked on my communication skills. I really got better at it. So it's those things that you picked up from your journey where you say, well, maybe that's not important, but it's actually important to the way you benefit from it collectively. So, and then I got into administration, which is really what I wanted to do, public administration. I'm a big World War II fan. So, and I love to read. And I read about, of course, I'm from the Philippines, so I love, in World War II, there was a big battlefront in the Philippines, in the Pacific Asian corridor for World War II. There was a book,
no,
I can't remember the name of the author now. It's a famous nonfiction book. It was the story about the rescue of American prisoners in the Philippines, in Lingayen and Luzon, in the big northern part of the island. And there was one particular character who played a major role in that rescue. His name was Captain Robert Prince. And he was the one that was strategizing all of the planning, all of the logistics on the behind the scenes. So he had to take care of the distraction. How do they get into the compound? How are they going to transport all of the inmates, the prisoners? What were their medical conditions were going to be? That's what I saw myself. That's me, the guy that works behind the background and being able to get things done. So in a way, the career that I had with the city of LA, where I've been doing a lot of this, many different aspects, diverse aspects of administration, from finance, accounting, risk management, contracts, facilities, and all of that, really kind of encapsulated that goal of mine to be that type of person that Captain Robert Prince was in the escape of the planning of the escape of the prisoners in World War II. So that's kind of where I got to where I'm at now. And I'm continuing that journey, because until I got into public higher education, I didn't really know what my passion was. I knew that I wanted to live a life of service. That at least was true. But when I was working in municipal government, it's such a big, vast, wide constituents. You don't really see the direct relationship. Now, in administrative services and public higher ed, it's not like I'm in the classroom and I'm not in counseling, but I do see the students and I do see what we do in the background with our administrative services team. We contribute to that student success. So that's kind of where I got to where I'm at now.
Great. Thank you for sharing all of that and how all these little components of your early career factors into your interest in it. I'm really happy to hear that you found your passion in service to the community, but through education in the background too. And it's interesting that you're really fascinated with history and how that is applied to the way you perceive things. But part of AAPI Heritage Month is actually acknowledging that those histories And for me too, how I got into this is, early on as an artist, I was like, why are there Asians here in this country in the first place? And it's like, oh, they immigrated here for a better life. But there's so many geopolitics, history, wars that explain like why there are Asian Americans in the United States. And oftentimes when I used to teach Asian American studies, and we go back to the history of like early Chinese migration, but not a lot of people know that, Asians have been in the Americas since the 1500s and 1600s, and so before the United States was the United States, you had through the Spanish galleon trade, you had, Filipinos and Chinese jump ship in the Americas, jump ship in Acapulco, and some of those communities migrated up north to what is now Louisiana. And not a lot of people know those kind of subtle histories, but also claiming that yes, we are part of the history of not only this country, but we're also part of the fabric. So it's really good to kind of incorporate those histories. I would like to move on to and talking about our career paths and how we got there. But what is, I mentioned like, well, what was your family's role or what was the community's role? But what I also want to discuss with you all and get your perspectives is what can you speak on the value of mentorship? Was there a certain person who really guided you to where you are now? Was there a group of people, or are you mentoring people now? But can you speak of the value of mentorship and who served you as a role model, or who were you looking at? I'm thinking Ms. Suh, like I grew up in the 80s, and Connie Chung was what everyone was talking about. She was the first kind of widely known Asian American anchor, and so like for me it's no big deal, but when she came on, like my dad would say, oh, like look, there's Connie Chung, and so that was celebrating that, and there was a first for that. But so I would imagine we all have our own mentors or people who we look up to or people who motivated us. Can you speak on that? And maybe we could go with Ms. Suh first.
I definitely have my role models. And as you were just talking about, Stephen, before even being in the business, before even knowing I wanted to go into the business, as we mentioned, I didn't know until much later that I wanted to do journalism. But, the likes of Lena Wynn, Sharon Tay, in the late 90s when I was in high school, I was watching them on TV and going, oh my gosh, they're like young Asian girls and they're on TV and they look so confident and I remember thinking that in high school and thinking, wow, that's pretty incredible, not knowing at all that I wanted to follow in their footsteps at that time. But, mentors, honestly, I think photographers, the photojournalists in my career were my true mentors who never candy coated anything for me. I can think of specific names and I need to name them because I say names because, man, I want to give them this credit. Martin Orozco from ABC7. He asked me one morning as an intern, he said, you sure you want to do this? You sure you want to do this? Bobby Chung, KBC, who says, are you ever going to get in front of the camera? You're just gonna sit there in the back of the truck and watch Garth do this? You're gonna do that? Andy Blake from KCFW in Montana after my first live shot, which was a disaster. People think, people on air, we never make mistakes, or we're just always perfect, or it's like a robot and we just get up there and read the teleprompter and it's always great. It's not. My first live shot in Montana, when I first went live ever on TV, right? It was a mess. And Andy Blake put his arms around me and said, you know what, girl, you're going to have 1 million more of those in your career, so you better stop it right now. And I just thought, wow, he's so right. And, speaking of mentorship, these mentors are people who wanted me to be my best at what I do. They truly cared about my success and that I do it well. And whether it was through tough love sometimes, they really showed me things that I would have never seen otherwise. So speaking of mentorship, Stephen, you also touched on, am I currently mentoring anyone right now? I am. And excuse me, that's because I really truly do see the importance of it. Yes, it takes time. Yes, out of my own time from work or whatever it is. But you know what? if I can think back to the time when I wanted to first become a news reporter, I mean, zero idea. So much crying because I was like, this is not it. This is not it for me. This is too hard for me. I want to, you know, not just teach and not just show, but make sure that, you know, future people who want to be in my career and, you know, take the same footsteps and go in the same path, you know, I want them to know and know first of all that A, it's not always going to be a perfect day on TV, and B, I want you to be as ready as possible. I don't want you to have those feelings of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What my first live shot? Dear God, what happens here now? What I go live? Why am I going live? You know, and just to have someone to give you that confidence along the way, because so much of what I do is confidence. Yes, 1,000% is writing, absolutely. But 100% more, it's also the confidence. I can do this. I can go on TV and tell you about this. And it's, you know, I work with some, you know, interns who are very shy. And you might think, my gosh, well, forget it. If they're shy, they're not going to be in this business. But gosh, it's so incredible to see this happen. The blossoming, you know, it's just incredible. And I think that's why mentorship is so important.
Thank you, Ms. VP Pascual, what is the role of mentorship in your career path, and who are your role models, or who helped you, and who are you currently helping?
I've been fortunate to have had a really good mentors through my career journey. There's one particular one in the city of LA. I can mention her name. She already retired now. She was the chief of public transit for LADOT. Her name is Corinne Ralph. She never said, I'm going to mentor you. I never asked her can you mentor me? But the relationship that we developed between the two of us working, remember, when I said that I'm really good at working behind the scenes, I get things done. I may not be the one front and center, she was, but I got everything done for her, packaged in a nice, you know, ribbon and bow. And that's what I did. And that's what I was efficient with. Until one day she told me, I need you to do this presentation to one of the committees for city council. I said, what? Huh? Me? No, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to do that. I get all your data, I get all your graphs, I get all your stuff for you, but I don't want to do that. So she said, no, you can do it. You can do it. And I said, I took a deep breath and, well, okay, well then I did it. That was my first time to do. It's not because I'm not good at public presentation. I've done presentations and training, but not in that level of magnitude where, well, what I do, you know, what questions that but anyway, so she was the one that really saw maybe the sparkle in the dust for me. And she and her boss, his name is James Lefton, they really gave me a lot of responsibility to be able to develop my own style, my own skill, and kind of get out of my comfort zone. Mentors are, to me, probably one of the most important aspects that you can have in your career path. Now, all of us were, you know, the way I like to think about it is sometimes there's a wall in front of you. You have to get to the other side. Now, do you go underneath? Do you go around? Do you go off the top? Or do you just say, well, this is as far as I go, right? So to me, that mentor is the one that's going to help push you, you know, because sometimes you can't do it by yourself. And you have to be vulnerable and be honest with yourself that I do need help and I do need to reach out for help. And that's the person that will nudge you to the other side, and so that you can reach to your goals. I have mentored. I've done that. I've realized what these people have become my role models, and I've done quite a bit in my own role to mentor other people. I developed this really good friendship with one of my colleagues at another community college district that Trustee Iino is familiar with. But this particular individual had all of the great aspects, really polished, really highly educated, has all of the training. The problem was self-confidence. So that was kind of what I saw in this person, and I said, you know what? You got everything else. You just need that. You just need that final push to the finish line. And I'm happy to say this particular person, lights out. So he's progressed quite a bit in his career, and I can feel proud of that. That I helped him along the way. So that's why now I'm also still continuously looking for mentorship opportunities with anybody who asks for it, whether they do or not, either formally or informally. But that's what I think my role is.
Thank you, VP Pascual. And thank you again for, being vulnerable about some of those issues too, which I think we all could do more of, just so people could learn. Like, yes, I was also insecure too. And, people think like, oh, he's a museum director, but, we are real people. And sometimes people also need to know that. Trustee Iino.
Yeah, I would tell you my entire life, I've been seeking and have sought out mentorship. I think, like I said, for a good part of until I was probably in my 20s, did I really get a path of a career for myself? So I think it was always trying to figure that out and look to others to kind of help guide me based off of characteristics or qualities that they saw in me that maybe I didn't see in myself. One of my, I think, go-tos always is the community college counselor who I had, who then when I figured out I wanted this job, I went back to her and I was like, hey, how do I do this? And she helped guide me. And then when I decided that I wanted to be a trustee, she was also one of the first people I went to. So Sue Oda Omori, thank you. It's being recorded, so I'm gonna send you this. But I think she's been a staple throughout my life. Depending on the hat I'm wearing too, I think certain mentors and people I kind of go to for those types of things. In addition to being a faculty member, I also serve as the president of my faculty union at El Camino College, and I represent over 950 faculty members. And so through labor, particularly, I think I've made a lot of really strong organizers and leaders doing some really hard work. And so I think there's my niche for that. There's my counseling colleagues, my community people that I go to. Alan Nishio is a wonderful mentor and someone who has made space for me in certain spaces that maybe didn't exist before, or in places that I didn't see myself being able to succeed in. And so I think that says a lot, when people want to make space for you and you're like, oh, really, me? Like, I didn't really think that would be something that I, to be considered, but I appreciate that. And I think now, as I mentioned, I'm in my 40s. It's kind of an interesting transition to now become a mentor and see yourself and looking at all the things that you've accomplished in the last 20 plus years of your life to be in a position to really help and support others. And I think young folks today, it's really challenging. There's a lot more going on, a lot more adversities that they have to deal with, whether that be economically, psychologically, emotionally, just a lot of things going on. And so I think, and being a counselor, I'm always trying to be present to support folks and then always check in with people. Here at El Camino College, we do have a MANA program that supports Native Hawaiian Pacifica students. And so, I'm always making sure that they feel supported, and even the staff that I'm hoping, move up the food chain to become directors, deans, VPs, hopefully presidents someday. And so I think always building those succession plans and spaces for people is always really important in my walk as a leader. I mean, I shouldn't put air quotes, but it's still an interesting transition for me. I think I've had some great conversations with the chancellor as well on my role as trustee. I'm a roll up your sleeves, do the work kind of person. And now that I sit in this very different role, potentially seen in a very different way, learning to adjust that is very interesting and challenging. But I think the other board members, they're all wonderful too and supportive, and even President Roman being able to reach out to me and be like, hey, I think you'd be great for this. And I'm like, really, you really want to hear me speak? And, and I just really appreciate everyone. And Dr. Ramirez, she's done so much to get us here. And, Director Wong knows a lot about me too. And so I think it's just really great. And I think for me, making sure we're building bridges and really a coalition to support each other. For me, I kind of, not hastily, because again, it took me 6 years to be here, but the day that I wanted to do this job, it was a pretty quick, okay, I'm going to do this. I want to be a trustee. But learning all of the details and things that go into it, it's a lot, but I want to make sure I try to normalize it as much as I can to show that real people, like Suzie said, we're real people, we make mistakes. But I think that the main thing is that we show up and we enjoy the ride, right? And it might be uncomfortable and challenging, but the work that I get to do for the district, it's so rewarding and so meaningful, and it makes it worth my being sweaty all the time.
Well, thank you everyone for answering those questions about mentorship. It's so cliche, but it truly takes a village to raise a child. None of us would be here where we are today if it wasn't the support from our communities, from our village. In many ways, the Los Angeles Community College District is an extended village for a lot of our students. And so it is our job and responsibility that we see everyone who is going through community college, that they are able to have the resources, they're able to attain their career goals and educational goals. And oftentimes that's through mentorship. And, for me, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my high school mentors and even college mentors. But it's also about, once we get in a leadership position, I'm going to put that in air quotes too, because I myself have imposter syndrome. And so I need to reconcile with that. But it's also, paying it forward to make sure that people behind us have those opportunities and have those leadership experiences and opportunities. So thank you for answering that. We're running out of time. I wish we had more time. So I'm going to do one last wrap up quick question for all three of you. And this is like, for me, it's like, what is the broader grouping of AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander? What is the role of this group? What is the role of, for instance, API Heritage Month? And how do we achieve, equity and diversity and do our social justice work? A lot of us are like public figures or work for public entities. So it's sometimes a challenge. But, where do you see the grouping of API for political empowerment and for the fight for social justice? And if we could just really quickly go answer this, it's a longer, kind of more deep question. But Ms. Suh, how do you incorporate like social justice work in these groupings, or in your career, or in your so how do you address social justice?
I think this is real recent, to be honest with you, in our business at least. I can remember coming into the newsroom and hearing the words, hey, we're not going to send Suzie to the K-Town story because, well, she's Korean, so it kind of seems like we're racist by sending her there. And I remember thinking in my head, no, it would behoove you to send me because I speak the language and I can talk to people there. And if it's a better interview or you get more out of someone, well, hey, there you go. You know what I mean? That was real recent, I think, in our newsroom. I would say in the last decade or so, that we are being more conscientious of the stories that we cover. That we include more of the diversity, more of different communities, not just stories that are big and happening for the day. We're now going to the smaller corners of the community, and telling these stories that we would have maybe never told 10 years ago. And I just love that is happening, but I certainly think that it can happen more. I think in our business and journalism, we're always, our job, they say, is obviously to tell people what's going on, but they say in local news, it's also a form of entertainment and feeding people what they want. That the top stories of they're always the murders and the things that we don't obviously want to see, but that's what we lead with. I always thought, this is just me ideal world thinking, but thinking, gosh, why don't we one day don't do what other stations do and maybe lead with the story about the grandma in South LA who decided she's going to take all her life savings and help her community. Why not lead with that? So I think, there's a lot of more work to be done as far as my business goes. And that's just me being 100% honest with you. But gosh, it's so interesting to see how much we have evolved for the better, though, to equally, I guess, better represent communities, whether it be, different, ethnic background communities or, socioeconomically, whatever, what have you. I just think that we're trying to be more inclusive in that sense. So that's what I see from my point of view in my line of work.
Thanks, Ms. Suh. And when I said we have to wrap this part up, it's also, thank you for being concise with that. It's also to open up for Q&A. So we do have a little bit more time, but I think this is going to be the last kind of round of questions before we do open it up. VP Pascual, what do you think, where in your role do you incorporate social justice work, and how do we utilize these communities and these broad categories and AAPI Heritage Month, which oftentimes can be problematic, but still a platform to kind of express and voice and kind of shed light on concerns that mainstream America doesn't have. Do you have any input on that, VP Pascual?
Yes, I think it's very important. Volunteerism is very important to get out there in the community. Promoting more awareness about Asian Americans and the role that Asian Americans played in the civil rights movement. When I went to law school, I didn't know about the Korematsu decision. As you know, if those of you who are familiar, the Korematsu decision is was the preface of the civil rights movement. And that was a Supreme Court decision based on the Japanese internment during World War II. But aside from that, there's also the Chinese Exclusion Act of the late 19th century. Then all of the other race, strifes that has happened. In my particular community, not a lot of Filipinos are aware, at least not that Filipinos that I talked to, about the Watsonville riot of the 1930s. So it's those type of, especially now that it's very relevant because of the Asian hate that we grappled with the pandemic and all of that. I think it's really important. That's part of that conversation that needs to happen.
Thank you. And not to, forget too, that, Filipinos and Asian Americans, but specifically Filipino American farm workers and the farm workers movement, which is, which people are talking about more and more, but, that's still a challenge to educate and use these platforms and this panel, for instance, to discuss those issues. So thank you for that, VP Pascual. Trustee Iino.
Even for mentioning that, because, there was three Filipinos who were part of the original farmer strike, that were prominent members of Cesar Chavez's and Dolores Huerta's inner circle for that. So thank you for mentioning that as well. And I forgot to mention that.
Okay. Thanks, VP Pascual. Trustee Iino.
Yes, this has been a really fun conversation. I think something else that we also need to recognize too are the voices that aren't in this space today. It's really interesting, right? Because we look at Asian American, Pacific Islander, which I like to call Pacifica students, but we're also missing the Desi American and other groups. The district, we did just pass a resolution in our May board, board agenda, and it's crazy. There's 50 ethnic groups that are included in this area, in this lump, right? And over 100 different languages, and so it's kind of unique in that place where we have generational, immigration, cultural differences, right? As well as also geographical, language, food, features, right? And so I think we always need to make sure that we hold space and have a good representation of what those missing folks, what they are, who they look like, and with their histories as well. because they're very important and I think oftentimes overlooked. And so I think me being in this role, as trustee, I now get to be the the Asian Pacific Islander advisory chair to the chancellor, where I get to bring in different folks from the community, political folks, community folks, our student voices. And so we want to really make sure that we're creating space for them, and then listening to our students, because one of the interesting things that also has happened at LACCD is that our API population on all fronts have declined, right? And so we really need to look at that and figure out what the issues are for why those students are not coming back post-COVID. As we're pretty much in an endemic now. And so I know our research and data people said a lot of the reason why was the international group students that we had lost due to COVID and overseas, school and things like that. But you look at our areas, ELAC, right? We have a large, at least Asian American population, and then LACC, has another big group. So I think if we could do more to understand those populations and make sure that their voices are heard is also something very important to me as I do this work.
Great. And thank you for shedding some insight on that. And the reason I'm also bringing this up too, because these categories are ever evolving, and usually they're evolving to be more inclusive, correct? But at the same time, some people, and speaking to, certain Pacific Islander communities, they feel marginalized and tokenized within the AAPI. And sometimes there's like, don't include us because you're not representing us. And I know we're supposed to be, this is like a celebratory AAPI heritage, panel, but at the same time, we actually have to discuss some of these critical issues because we want to be inclusive as possible and as representational. And as we're fighting for social justice, just because it's a smaller group that's kind of packaged or squeezed into this category doesn't mean that we should focus on some of those issues. And for instance, I got a chat from, I hope you don't mind, Dr. Hussein is like, and you had mentioned this, Kelsey, about the resolution is like, how do we expand these groups? How has, 10 years ago, I was saying people of color, POC, but now it's like, well, there's certain groups in that POC label that need to be emphasized, and so now we're saying BIPOC, which I completely support, Black and Indigenous and people of color. But, do we also, for AAPI, we should, acknowledge that there's a large South Asian component to that. And so I think that, that is kind of how we're evolving. And then hopefully, next year, we're, instead of saying AAPI, we might be saying AAPI-DA for Desi Americans. So these are all things that that are critical, but it's also not just celebrating, because there's a lot more hard work that we all need to do. But one of the reasons why each of you are on this panel is because you are currently doing the hard work, and we could learn so much from you with your experiences and how you've thought about some of these issues. And so, if there's actually, as we move into our Q&A period, these are kind of bigger and deeper questions that we can't, discuss or even resolve through this conversation. But I do want to open it up to the, to questions from, we still have over 70 people here watching us. Not to make you, Kelsey, or myself nervous, for those who get nervous in front of big crowds that we can't see. But why don't we go ahead and open it up for some questions.
Please feel free to raise your hand or post your question in the chat. That would be wonderful, everyone. Let's see.
While we're doing that, let me just wait a minute. I don't see anything coming across yet. But I could, why don't we do another quick question? Please. I do see a hand. It's from a very familiar face, President Rahman.
Thank you. It was amazing stories. I was listening to them. Couldn't have picked a better panel. Thank you so much for taking time to be here. It's amazing. And I think it's, as you can see from the folks that are here staying until the end, there's certainly a lot of interest and reception to what you're saying. I think a lot of the stories are resonating with many of us in terms of your experiences growing up, in terms of your relationship with your family, with others that have helped you. We touched on this a little bit, the imposter syndrome, right? And that seems to be a common a thing among many different cultures. Seems to be also something that's prevalent in our AAPI communities. This is for any of you if you care to add to it, but this notion that we're not good enough, or that somehow or another we're going to fail, and the risk of failure sometimes hinders our ability to propel and do other things. Suzie, you talked about confidence and how important that is in your profession and in others, but that doesn't seem to come always easy for some of us. And it can be an issue that really, as I said, hinders your ability to move into other positions and say, you know what, darn it, I am just as good or better. So any of you would like to expand on that in terms of how that's impacted, if it has, your career, or those that you work with, or that you're around? Because again, it seems to be a prevalent thing for many of our communities, and something that we're working to overcome, but sometimes it can be a barrier. So thank you for taking this on.
I'll be completely honest with you. I didn't even know what imposter syndrome was until maybe about 3 years ago. I can't remember what the conversation was, but it was at work with somebody, and I went to go look it up, and I said, oh my gosh, that's a thing. It's not just me. What? It's interesting that we bring this up in this conversation, because I think it truly does have a lot to do with culture. I think in the Asian culture, oftentimes you're taught to be very humble and not loud, and not the person in the room taking over the conversation, right? You want to be a little meek and not assertive, right? And I think I did grow up like that, really. I think I grew up with the mentality of, the way I grew up, my mom, serves my dad, so to speak, in terms of, the way she treats him. It's everything for my dad. It's, serve the man in the house. And that's what I grew up seeing, and that's my background. And I think a lot of that, I saw my mom, being a little mute sometimes when she wanted to express what she really wanted to say, but she didn't, because culturally that's not what women do. You don't do that. You don't talk back to your husband. You don't, say what the issue is. You shut your mouth and you make dinner. This is, again, me being so honest, but I think a lot of that has to do with the confidence that I'm talking about. And also I didn't grow up with my parents really, because they worked a lot, right? And this is a story that immigrant parents and children, we can all relate to and share, is my parents were not there, right? After school, they were not there for a lot of my events. I remember riding my bike in 3rd grade, doing my own hair for a talent show, and my parents not being there, things like that. And I think that does a lot to your confidence, both culturally and the way you grew up in a household. And especially for my job, obviously you need the confidence, right? You need to look like you're authoritative, and, people need to trust you and consider you someone who is credible. And if you don't have that confidence, but I think I really, to be honest, to this day, there is still that inside me, the imposter syndrome. Like, am I really here right now? When I see, okay, this is what gives me the real reality check, and y'all will get this. When I see Pat Harvey, okay? And if you don't know Pat Harvey and you live in Los Angeles, you better ask somebody, okay? That's when I get that suddenly, because I'm like, whoa. I used to watch her on TV in high school, and she is absolute classy, legendary news anchor woman to me in Los Angeles, and I get to rub elbows with her every day. So to this day, I have that. And I think, how did it affect my career? Did it, change my trajectory in any way? Perhaps it did. In certain times when I could have spoken up a little bit more, I didn't, or, in that sense, because I thought, I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that story pitch is good enough when I was a young reporter, but I realize that now. And again, when this was brought up in the conversation, I'm like, wow, it's so important we talk about this. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Anyone else want to respond to President Rahman's question?
Sure. I would tell you, after a year sitting on this board, if you would have told me the things that I'd be doing within this year ahead of time, I probably wouldn't have gone this path. And I think, thankfully, I didn't know what was required. And once serving in the role, I just kind of, again, rolled up my sleeves and went with it. And it is important to be sitting here and adding to the conversations and the decision making based off of the experience and the path that I've had in my life. And being able to acknowledge that is pretty it's a pretty interesting process, I think. But imposter syndrome, always there, always in every space that I'm in. And so I think trying to challenge myself with that, and being here today is a big part of that, because when President Rahman asked me, my inside self was like, run for the hills, don't do it, because who would want to hear what I have to say or what my experiences are. But I think it's important to make other folks know too that they're very capable to do hard things, and find them to be challenging but rewarding and meaningful and worth it at the end of the day. And so I'm already feeling a lot less sweaty by, now that we're wrapping this up, and I will count it as a win. And all of you know a little bit more about me, but I would tell you in the whole campaign process too, oftentimes I think I was underestimated, and I don't know if it's because I look young again and I'm Asian American female, and I kind of look at that as well. I guess I'd rather be underestimated than overestimated, because then you're constantly surprising people in a better way than in a negative way. But it's partially what I've accepted about, I guess, how people see me and my path in life, and I'm learning to embrace it. And so, yeah, but again, super rewarding. And I thank all of you in the campaign too. I think it was really heartwarming to see the API community really come out to support me. I did not have a lot of political capital going into this. I had experience of what community colleges are, who we serve, and the community aspect, but politically, no clue. And I hope that's an asset rather than like something bad. But it was just really nice to see all walks of life, folks just come out in ways that I didn't even know that I needed support. Just came out to support me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm very mindful of that, and I represent a huge community, and I hope after today you all feel comfortable to reach out to me, so I can make sure I am a servant leader and someone that's able to really move the district and support all of you to do the wonderful work that we do, which is serve students.
Thank you, Trustee Iino.
Well, for me, what Susie alluded to earlier, sometimes, unfortunately, we are the victim of our own success, because when you're really good at something, and sometimes people look at that, that's all you can do. You're really good at that, and probably you shouldn't do anything else or rise above that. I've been, kind of functional equivalently told that what they didn't pick me for a position or promotion sometimes because they're looking for a racehorse, but I'm a workhorse. So you probably, all of us can relate to that problem. But for me, sometimes all of those opportunities that I didn't get were probably not meant to be. And I'm kind of fatalistic that way, because I always think in the back of my mind, there's something else better that is in store for me. So, it's part of our cultural DNA where, we're just quietly on the background, and we're kind of, we do the work, we do the tough job, we do very well. But I think we also have to be our own personal advocates of ourselves, so that we can show people that, hey, we deserve that job too, or we could do a better job at that. So, so that imposter syndrome is just on our own limitations of what we, beyond our imagination, can do, right? And that applies to everybody.
And I think this is where, and some of you brought this up, where mentors play a role in that, of giving us the self-confidence that we much need, because many of us do have imposter syndrome, coming from immigrant communities, as a woman, for instance. And so thank you for being your candor and being vulnerable to talk about those experiences, because like Ms. Suh mentioned, like, she didn't realize that there was this imposter syndrome thing. And as we're talking about it, maybe some other people are like, oh, this is kind of normal. And sometimes I would, it's easy to kind of blame racialized society in America and the constant microaggressions that people of color or BIPOC communities get. But, turning it back around too, we have to have the hard conversations of, some of this imposter syndrome is internal too. It comes from, sometimes patriarchal communities, patriarchal traditions. There's cultural differences between maybe, a traditional Asian society, specifically, like, for instance, Korean society, when it comes here, the different, values when it comes to, women's liberation. But those are all things that we need to be critical of our own communities, on top of which, we don't have time, but the, colorism and prejudice within the AAPI communities, as we're kind of trying to build coalitions, fight against oppression and racism in the society, to create a more equitable, more diverse society. We need to look within our own communities too, which we don't have time, but I think, I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up. And maybe next year we can actually talk about some of those harder questions. But let's go back to the questions. Armand has
We'll
a
take
question.
this as our last question.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kakanian. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone, and thank you, panelists. Hi, trustee. My question is, relating to the community and what you talked about, as a member of the Armenian community, being connected to the Silk Road, we actually are part Asian. We actually even have certain words like "z" and "sh" that we borrowed. But this is an issue in our community, and I've heard this from some of my friends from the API community that is a concern, from language barrier to people not understanding the history, the differences within the communities, because people think in my community, we all come from the same area, we all have the same traditions. And even when it comes to our students here, I've had API students who study very hard, but they do have needs, homeless students, hungry students, but sometimes, family pride, history, not admitting that you can't speak English well because people might think you're not educated, even though you do have a doctoral for where you come from. How can we address these concerns where we really bring forward and talk to both communities? Not only to educate people about the history of the API community, what they've contributed to California and United States, but also how to talk to the API family saying, these are the programs, what are your concerns, how we can work better helping some of the students. And that's something that I would like to hear how we can address, for a community college that really serves one of the largest API communities in the state of California.
I mean, that's why I'm here, partially. So again, Dr. Pascual, I am a doer, and I am not here just to sit here idly. So I think it's been a year, but there's still so much for me to learn and navigate. And I think that's where I really rely on all of you to help me with the blind spots in areas, right? And raise awareness and help assist me advocate in spaces and places that I have access to that maybe not all folks do. And so keeping me held accountable for is going to be a huge thing that I definitely ask all of you to do. And I think being adaptable and lifelong learning too is also hopefully going to help me in this process. You know, change is hard. People don't like to change things, right? And particularly in higher education, sometimes things move really slowly, but as we've learned with COVID, we can move really quickly. And we have some exceptional leaders, you know, in all spaces at all levels to help us move together. And I think we just, again, from my activist brain and labor brain, we need to build coalitions, and we need to support each other and make sure that there's space. And so I appreciate the question that you're asking, because it's huge, right? Like, our students are struggling, our students are in pain, and not all students know how to ask for help in ways that make sense to them. And so making sure that us as leaders in these spaces, we recognize those needs and we create those spaces will potentially save lives, right? And not just that person's life, their family and potentially generations. And the chancellor is gone now, but I think that is one thing that he consistently says, right? Community colleges, we are the game changer and for multiple generations. And so what the work that we do and the way that we can outreach to not only the students, but the communities and their families, it's so meaningful. And we just have to be constantly reminded of that and do the work. But then also check in with each other as employees, because you know what, the load that we've been managing pre-COVID is nothing like the load we're managing now. And again, right, whether that be emotionally, psychologically, physically, or just job wise, you know, we've taken on so many additional things in addition to our personal lives. And so I think hopefully we're able to support each other in this process. And if there's something missing, again, that's why I'm sitting in the seat. So you need to let me know what we are missing and how we can build bridges to get there. Because
Great.
we are the largest community college in the country, potentially the world. On a good day, we serve 250,000 students. And so we need to be able to serve them and put them on a path that is going to eventually help all of us, because society is just going to be better.
Yeah. Well, you know, thank you, Kelsey, for that. Thank you for that excellent question. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. You know, so I want to thank all the panelists. Thank everyone who put this together. Thank you all for coming out.